Hey there. So it is currently 3:56 in the morning. While most people are very much so asleep, I am going to be discussing something that occurred recently in the camera world, the photography sphere, and I'm going to be editing this photo here. So actually, I'll just go right into the article. So Olympus, a very old camera company, calls it quits, as you can read in this headline here, after 84 years. And I didn't actually even know that they were a camera company for 84 years. I knew of their name, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but it's actually kind of interesting going to the history of it. From what I've read from this article and others, Olympus basically started out as a microscope company, and they eventually started making cameras back in the 30s. And they were actually a pretty significant name in the camera world. I like I said, I'll get into how my association with them, but they basically were like a household name in terms of cameras, in the same way that Canon, Nikon, Sony are today. Back in the 70s and 80s, from what I've heard, that a lot of people who would do landscape photography and hikers and things like this, they were renowned for their cameras because they were smaller and compact. And I think I remember reading that they basically brought like one of the first 35 millimeters to market, or like with mass like a mass marketed version of a 35 millimeter at least. So they're a pretty significant name, and their name is definitely rooted in photography history, especially associated with today and commercial ventures for different companies and stuff like that. So it's actually really sad seeing this happen. And for myself, there's a reason why this hits me in a particular way. And I'm not particularly emotional about companies going under, but for Olympus, they actually have a spot in my heart, because when I started out taking photos, I had like a little dinky kind of Polaroid camera that my parents bought me. Well, actually, technically speaking, first I started taking photos with their digital camera. They had this little Kodak point and shoot thing, probably like 2 to 4 megapixels, and I borrowed it, took it all the time, and would just go into like cornfields and near my grandparents and forests up in my cottage and take photos with it all the time. But then they eventually got me a very kind of basic little Polaroid digital camera, again very cheap, but back then it was my own camera, so I was super stoked. I got to take my own photos. I had a memory card. I remember actually taking a school trip with it when I was like 15 or 16 and learning what formatting is. And for all those who don't know what formatting is, it's when you delete your card. And I remember just riding back home from school on the bus and looking through the menu, because it was like the first time I'd really taken it out seriously to shoot with it was during the school trip. And I saw the word format card or format camera, and I was like, what does that mean? And lost all my images. Point being, I didn't first start out with DSLRs. I had those cameras, but a friend of mine had a DSLR, and it was an Olympus. And so my first real understanding of how to shoot in manual, overcoming the auto thing, a lot of people struggle at the beginning. You just want to take photos, so you don't really worry about learning all the technical things about using a camera. And now, obviously, having done this for so much longer than back then, these things are barely technical to me. These are just kind of like a second language when you're talking about shutter speed, aperture, ISO, metering, white balance. All these things is very, very basic now for me, at least. I've been doing this for a while. But Olympus was how I got my head around all these concepts. I used their cameras, and I remember when I bought my first camera, my first DSLR, I think I paid for my parents, it was for like a birthday present. My parents paid for half of it, and I paid for the other half, or something like this. It was a Canon Rebel XTI. It was like 10 megapixels. It was a great camera, honestly. I took a lot of really good images with it, even by today's standards. There's 2 or 3 that I took. I'll throw one up on the screen here. I took this image with that camera. So it just goes to show that you don't really need an incredible camera. If anything, a lens will lend you better. If you have a good lens and a bad camera, that will take you a lot further. Regardless, when I bought that camera, I actually was super disoriented because I was so used to the Olympus menu system and everything like that. So for me, it was just, Canon was like another language I was learning. And then I eventually became normal, and I haven't used my friend's Olympus in forever because he doesn't really use his camera anymore. But so Canon became my normal thing, and then now I'm shooting Sony mostly. I use my Canon once in a while, but the Sony menu system is now more my language, so to say. So the departure of a company like Olympus has actually kind of hit me, I just wasn't expecting to pull it out in like a news article, just like they went under after like 3 years of no sales, I think it said, or 3 no profits. and it recorded losses for the last 3 years. I think I remember reading another article that they basically just made no profits for 3 years straight. The Japanese company made its first camera. Yeah, in 1936, after years of microscope manufacturers. I mean, yeah, I could have sworn I remember seeing that they just basically made no profits and that they were laying people off like en masse for the last 3 years. So I'm sure if you paid attention to this kind of thing, you saw it coming. I didn't, so it kind of hit me. But also, I guess it just kind of, it's like a micro or a macro. I always confuse those terms. It's a good example of the volatility of ever-changing technological fields and companies and markets and things like this, because a company like them, like a Nikon or a Canon today, if they make 2 or 3 wrong moves, they could be out in 10, 15 years potentially, especially with how fast things are changing now. Because the shift from film to digital was pretty huge, but I don't think anybody could have anticipated how fast things were changing. And even today, in the sense that 10 years ago, maybe even less, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, DSLRs were like the standard. You always shot with a DSLR if you use digital. But now mirrorless cameras are like, I barely use my DSLR anymore. Like I love the feel of a DSLR, but it just makes a lot more sense for mirrorless cameras to kind of be the new wave, because they're smaller, they're more compact, all these things. Like there's so many benefits to them, and they're usually arguably priced as well, and sometimes like more affordable, if anything. So yeah, I don't know, who knows, maybe DSLRs will fade out soon and everybody will be using mirrorless cameras. And part of me kind of doubts that. You know, I'm particularly fond of the feel of a DSLR. Like my Canon is much bulkier, and I made a video going over all the gear that I use, and some of these are similar points, but I'm repeating them because it's very true that the feel of a DSLR, especially if you're used to the weight of a DSLR with a lens on it versus a mirrorless camera with a lens on it, the mirrorless feels kind of dinky. It feels like a toy. It feels like something if I drop, I'm gonna immediately regret it. Like an iPhone, I guess it's the difference between like your old flip phones, where you drop that and like obviously you'd be a bit shook, you know, you didn't want to break your phone if you had a flip phone, but I'd be a lot more confident in my flip phone being okay than my iPhone or my Android or something with like glass everywhere. Basically, that's the analogy I'm drawing here. Basically, you understand. But yeah, so point being, the departure of a company like Olympus is kind of sad, and the company that bought them doesn't seem particularly interested in trying to salvage whatever. Doesn't seem particularly interested in salvaging anything of the company. Who knows what they're going to do with it. I think they're called JIP or something like that. It's a Japanese company, from what I remember reading. Could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, who knows? And I guess this was just an interesting example of what could come potentially for similar companies like Canon or Nikon. And like Sony, for example, like when I first started taking photos, Sony was making DSLRs, but Sony doesn't need to make DSLRs. They're a giant company. They weren't banking on their cameras becoming a giant market force in the camera world. And now Sonys are arguably like the most popular, if not tied with like Canon, Nikon. So it's a super volatile market, like everything right now, especially with Rona and general economic distress right now. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about this for a bit. So those are my thoughts. And if you use an Olympus, I'm sure you probably feel the same way I do. Or if you used to use an Olympus, you might feel a similar way. If you don't, might not have even known of them before this. I know I probably wouldn't have if I didn't start shooting with them. So totally understandable. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to the channel, like this video, comment, all that stuff. You can find links in the description to all my socials. You can find prints of mine, my newsletter, all that good stuff. So I hope you take care, and I hope you have a great day. Cheers.